While 1983 would have fewer stone-cold classics, it was still quite a fun year for horror. 1983 would be the year of swatches and GoBots. It would be the year that the Moonwalk was introduced, and Ray-Ban sunglasses would explode in popularity due to the Tom Cruise movie Risky Business. 1983 saw the United States invade Grenada, while a show called Fraggle Rock would be one of New Network HBO's first original programs. We would have the introduction to two plumbers named Mario and Luigi right as the video game landscape was seeing a crash. Finally, John Landis, Vincent Price, and Michael Jackson would give the world an anthem for horror with a nearly 14-minute long music video entitled Thriller. And speaking of music and horror, one of the top songs of the year would be inspired by a news report of a serial killer and would take its name from a rather grisly horror film, 1980's Maniac. The lyrics were originally violent, but its catchy beat and chorus would catch the ear of director Adrian Lynn for his new film Flashdance. It would be rewritten for obvious reasons, so next time you hear how she's dancing like she's never danced before, just know that it was first,
"He's a maniac, that's for sure. He'll kill your cat and nail it to the door."
While there would be a couple of big ones, 1983 would not be the year of the slasher, but instead a time for experimentation. It would be a year for solid directors to sometimes have multiple films. It was also very much the year of Stephen King.
Well, the weird thing is I've seen the movie multiple times, I've read the book once. Got the hardcover right when it came out, got it for Christmas.
Stephen King is no stranger to adaptations of his work. It was shown that his work could be bankable and award-worthy right from the onset with 1976's Carrie, which was directed by Brian De Palma with a script by Lawrence D. Cohen. Not only did it break the bank financially with its $33 million box office off of only a $1.8 million budget, but it was one of the few horror movies to make noise during awards season. While it's not uncommon for there to be one King adaptation every 3 months in every given year now, post-Carrie we would only see about one per year. 1983 was the first year that showed what type of draw he could be, with 3 movies all hitting theaters within 5 months of each other. And you know what? All 3 were successful.
In the fact that he is still relevant now, and I'm still buying his books now and still being scared by his books and his son's books. So that guy is creating an entire legacy of just horror writers and books and novels and spin-off movies.
Now there's a new name for terror. Cujo.
The first of the triple threat would be Cujo, released on August 12, 1983. It was directed by Louis Teague and starred Dee Wallace as the frightened mother trying to desperately protect her and her son from a giant rabid Saint Bernard. Cujo wasn't always rabid, and he wasn't always a life-threatening beast either. He gets bit on the nose and the disease slowly takes hold, while Dee Wallace's housewife character Donna and her son Tad are getting their car fixed. Vic, Donna's husband and Tad's father, leaves and Cujo changes. He kills the neighbor and eventually a policeman, while Donna and her son hide in a car. Fears of dehydration and heat stroke set in, so Donna decides to take action. In a tense series of moments, she is able to fight off Cujo multiple times and saves her son while also reuniting with her ad executive husband. Cujo looks incredibly menacing in the movie, but the dogs portraying the monster were almost too nice on set. Cujo would pull in $21 million on its $6 million budget, even with its mixed reviews from critics. Dee Wallace would continue her genre appeal to modern day with multiple Rob Zombie movie roles amongst other recent films. Director Louis Teague would be tapped for another King movie 2 years later with the Drew Barrymore-led anthology Cat's Eye, but also direct fan favorites Jewel of the Nile and Navy SEALs.
Ooh, Navy SEALs!
Like most Stephen King adaptations, it hasn't received the remake treatment yet. Still, the project has been floating around since 2015, and there's always a chance that a studio could want a reimagining, perhaps more in line with the much darker novel over 40 years later.
Stephen King, The Dead Zone.
The second of 1983's triple King feature would be in the form of The Dead Zone. It would be released on October 21st and be directed by genre favorite David Cronenberg.
I'm a huge fan of David Cronenberg. I love body horror in general, and I think that his movies really push the boundaries of like what the human body can be, because there's nothing more frightening than when, if you get sick and your body starts doing things that you can't control, you're just a passenger in the vessel.
While Dee Wallace would carry most of the load acting-wise in Cujo, The Dead Zone is stuffed with heavy-hitting acting talent. Christopher Walken leads and has a supporting cast that includes Tom Skerritt, Martin Sheen, and Brooke Adams. John Carpenter collaborator and frequent creative partner Deborah Hill even produced it. The story follows Johnny Smith, played by Walken, who gets in a car accident and falls into a coma for 5 years. After he awakens, he finds out that he has the ability to see into a person's past, present, and future through the act of physical touch. This gift is scary at first because he has no control over it, or what he sees, and the girlfriend he loved has moved on in the 5 years since, leaving him alone and confused. Eventually, he got back to almost what he was physically, and he uses his new gift to help a sheriff with a series of murders that he can't solve. He eventually agrees, and while he helps solve the crimes, it comes at a cost. He finds out that one of the sheriff's own deputies is the murderer, but before they can arrest him, he kills himself. This causes the deputy's mother to shoot Johnny before she too is killed. He was able to solve the crime, but at what cost? He moves to another town to try and start a new life, but his visions continue to make everyday life impossible. He decides to tutor children as he was an English teacher before his accident, but he is still unable to shake his curse. He sees 3 boys dying by drowning and tries to get the family to change their plans, but 2 of the boys end up dying still. It's here where he discovers a dead zone in his abilities, where sometimes there's just no way to prevent what he sees. He meets a presidential hopeful played by Martin Sheen at a rally where his ex-love and her husband frequent, and sees horrifying visions of this man in office starting World War III by sending a nuclear strike to Russia. Torn between what to do with that information after everything that he has experienced with his gift, he seeks the advice of his doctor, who says he would do everything in his power to prevent something so evil from happening. He does, but dies in the process. Thankfully, his actions show what kind of man the presidential candidate is, and he takes his own life.
And I love that movie, not just because it's sort of very aesthetic and very precise and very simple, but that it goes there at the end.
A decidedly less happy ending than that of Cujo, but with great performances, especially by Christopher Walken. While he would later parody the same character on Saturday Night Live, with the catch being that he sees banal occurrences in people's futures instead of life-threatening ones.
Look, you don't get it, do you? You're wasting coffee!
First off, we should do an entire interview series just on Christopher Walken performances and how fucking creepy that guy is, from The Dead Zone to Communion on to whatever else.
Walken almost wasn't cast in the first place. The movie wouldn't make quite as much as Cujo, with its higher budget being closer to $10 million and its box office being closer to $20 million. But it had higher review scores than its big cuddly dog counterpart. Unlike Cujo, the property would have a life of its own in multiple ways, with it being the first novel of King's to take place in his all-encompassing town of Castle Rock. and the property would get a show starring Anthony Michael Hall in the lead role that would last a whopping 6 seasons. As for Cronenberg, this would be one of his 2 movies this year to get released, alongside Videodrome starring James Woods.
That's a movie that is one of my favorites because it is so prescient. Like there's a whole sequence where someone has what is right now is a virtual reality helmet. And this was '83. Like this is a virtual reality helmet, and they're trying to record someone's dreams and what he can see through the helmet. There's so much going on, how media impacts and how the amount of charged material you receive, does it change your brain? What if it did change your brain? What if a gland was formed with the Videodrome signal? There's so much going on in how communications and media impacts culture and vice versa in that movie that and it has the darkest ending ever. The darkest ending of a studio release ever. I can understand why it was a complete flop when it came out, but if you really want to challenge yourself intellectually and emotionally, you go watch Videodrome. It will knock your socks off.
Christine. Body by Plymouth. Soul by Satan.
My father was a huge Stephen King fan, and he read all of Stephen King's books. And so Christine, believe it or not, was the first, the Bachman books was the first Stephen King book that I ever read, but then I read Christine. And so I think Christine might have been the first movie that I saw in a book that I actually read.
The third movie on the Masters of Horror tour would be Christine. This would release all the way at the end of the year on December 9th. Another Stephen King film and another star director. John Carpenter would follow in the steps of Brian De Palma, George Romero, Tobe Hooper, and Stanley Kubrick with his turn at a King property. This would be his first and only shot, as he would be replaced on the following year's Firestarter with Mark L. Lester before principal photography even started. Christine would be a deviation from Carpenter's normal fare, with hardly any of his regulars involved. Apart from Alan Howarth helping out with the music department, and Harry Dean Stanton being featured in a role 2 years after Escape from New York, there isn't anything else that would suggest that this is a Carpenter movie. It was a big studio film. King was so hot at the time that the movie was put into production before the book was even released to the public. The movie starts with the creation of a demon car in 1957, before jumping ahead to the late 70s, where perpetual nerd Arnold Cunningham buys the car from a junkyard, and as he works on the vehicle, Arnold begins to change. He sheds his nerdy persona and starts becoming arrogant and too cool for school. Literally, as his grades begin to suffer, the local gang starts to pick on him. Tell me if you've heard that one before in a Stephen King story. And he begins dating a new student. The car gets simultaneously jealous of Arnold's girlfriend, but also protective of its new driver.
You feel the love story between Christine and Keith Gordon's character. You feel that relationship. Carpenter does an excellent job of capturing that, and that's I think less there in the book.
And after the gang messes with the car, they all die alone one by one in gruesome ways. In one of the great scenes of the 80s, Christine chases after one of the gang members entirely on fire.
It has some landmark terrifying stuff in it. You know, that car on fire, chasing the guy down the street is, and you feel the personality of the car right from the beginning, you know, with the George Thorogood version of Bad to the Bone. It's fantastic. It sets the tone immediately of what that movie is.
The car is determined to take its vengeance, and is able to self-repair after the acts are done, you know, to hide the evidence. Arnold dies while still fully obsessed with Christine, but his friends can destroy the possessed car and crush it into a cube. This being the 80s and all, the car twitches at the very end, perhaps leaving the door open for a sequel that would never come.
What he did with Cujo is he said, hey, dogs can be scary. Cars can be scary, and something that you possess or that that you own can own you was a concept that I never, I guess, thought of. And someone's obsession with an item and how that can be dangerous and how the item can eventually control you and own you.
Similar to Cujo, the critics would be split on the film's merits. but the public came out to support it, and it made $21 million on its $10 million budget. While the young cast does a great job with their characters, we almost got a big star in the title role before he decided to go dancing in a small town. While there was certainly one undisputed king who sat on the horror cinema throne in 1983, the rest of the year had a wondrous assortment of both treasure and trash for horror hounds to sink their teeth into. While you may not be able to name as many hits off the top of your head as other years throughout the decade, a search of what was released yields memorable genre work that were not only staples of video stores everywhere, but benchmarks that were handed down from sibling to sibling, parent to child, or discovered on our own. Video stores, late night cable, and even taking a chance at the movie theater could lead down several roads in 1983. And that's not even mentioning some of the bigger entries to spotlight the year. While it might seem like a bit of an odd duck at first, 1983 gave us some truly memorable movies to browse through, and should be explored in its entirety to have the full effect.
On the next episode, sit back and relax as we travel to SeaWorld Orlando to be terrorized by that mechanical shark again in the preposterous but strangely entertaining Jaws 3. Until next time, gore hounds.
Hi friends, your humble narrator Tyler Nichols here, and I hope that you enjoyed that episode of 80s Horror Memories. If you missed our previous episode, click over here. If you want to see more from our series, click up here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right here. And most importantly, stay spooky, folks.